Welcome to this explainer. Now, right off the bat, I need you to know we are not just doing a standard history lesson today. No, we are cracking open a declassified dossier. We're looking at a world of global espionage, intense deception, and frankly, high-stakes survival. Our modern world is totally shaped by this ultimate weapon, but the true story of how it actually spread, it plays out like a gripping, geopolitical spy thriller. So let's dive right into this.
To really understand the extreme, almost unbelievable lengths nations will go to, just think about 1986. You have this technician, Mordecai Vanunu, and he decides to leak photographs of Israel's highly classified nuclear facility straight to the British press. Well, the response to this was swift and honestly straight out of a movie. A covert Mossad honey trap operation is immediately launched to capture him, and it results in an 18-year prison sentence. This right here, this is the shadowy underworld of nuclear proliferation. It's a place where secrets are guarded with absolute zero-tolerance ruthlessness.
So here is the agenda for the dossier we're unpacking today. We're covering stolen secrets and double agents, broken pledges among allies, humiliation breeding nuclear retaliation, honey traps and covert tests, the ultimate nuclear smuggling ring, and finally, who enters the shadows next.
Section 1. Stolen Secrets and Double Agents.
The original battleground for global spies was really centered on sheer exclusivity. Think about it, only 10 out of 195 nations have successfully acquired this capability. The whole thing started back in 1938 when nuclear fission was discovered, which of course prompted the intensely secretive U.S. Manhattan Project. But trying to keep a secret of that magnitude among just 5% of the world, that required some serious next-level deception.
So during World War II, the US, the UK, and the Soviet Union, they were allies. But suddenly, in 1941, US and British scientists just stopped sharing their nuclear research. Naturally, sensing they were being cut out of the loop, the Soviets decided to infiltrate the Manhattan Project with their own spies. But the US had a counter-move ready. They actually turned those operatives into double agents, basically spies who are pretending to work for the Soviets but are actually being controlled by the Americans.
The U.S. strategy here was super clever. Just feed these double agents false data to totally derail the Russian efforts. But the Soviets were already suspecting they were being played, so they rejected the stolen designs entirely and just relied on their own independent research. And it worked. They succeeded way earlier than the U.S. expected, detonating their RDS-1 test in 1949, which officially ignited the Cold War.
Section 2. Broken pledges among allies.
You know, once ultimate supremacy was on the table, supposed friends ruthlessly betrayed one another. It's crazy. The UK had actually handed its early research over to the US under the Quebec Agreement, fully expecting to share the technology. But the second the US built the bomb, they cut Britain completely off. In response to that massive betrayal, the UK had to rapidly accelerate its own solo program, eventually testing off the coast of Australia in 1952.
Now, with the US, the USSR, and the UK all armed, the stakes evolved from standard atomic bombs to something way more terrifying. They made the leap from fission, which is splitting atoms, to fusion. Fusion actually joins atoms together, literally mirroring the exact process that powers the sun itself. And because of that, it creates an exponentially larger blast.
The escalation of this new tech was breakneck. In 1952, the U.S. detonated a hydrogen bomb that was 450 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. 450 times. Desperate to prove their own dominance, the USSR successfully tested theirs just 3 years later in 1955, and the UK followed swiftly right after in 1957. The arms race was officially, undeniably spiraling out of control.
Section 3. Humiliation breeds nuclear retaliation.
But what about the nations outside that big three? Well, a lot of the times, they would state a public goal of developing peaceful civilian energy, just keeping the lights on. But the actual covert operation happening behind the scenes was weaponization, and it was almost always triggered by deep geopolitical embarrassment. For example, France initially just wanted nuclear energy, but during the 1956 Suez Canal crisis, they were openly threatened by the USSR and economically pressured by the US to retreat. That humiliation literally forced France into the shadows to arm themselves. Similarly, India's devastating loss in the 1962 Himalayan War against China pushed them to covertly seek the ultimate deterrent.
To fuel its secretive retaliation, France actually extracted uranium from its African colonies, specifically Niger, Gabon, and Madagascar. This ultimately led to a successful 1960 test out in the Sahara Desert. China, on the other hand, had a different path.
They had been threatened with nuclear strikes by the U.S. during the Korean War back in 1950. Originally, they were relying on the USSR for help, but China was eventually forced to discover its own uranium reserves deep in its mountains after a really bitter ideological split with the Soviets.
And this brings us to an incredibly petty, yet completely fascinating piece of intelligence history. When Chairman Mao and Soviet leader Khrushchev clashed, the Soviets just packed up and withdrew all their scientists, completely leaving China's program in the dust. Mao took this as a direct personal challenge. So when China triumphantly tested its first bomb in 1964, they named it Project 596. The 590 stood for 1959, and the 6 stood for June, the exact month and year the Soviets abandoned them. It was literally a massive, explosive slap in the face.
10 years later, in 1974, the world felt another massive shockwave. India conducted a covert test in the Rajasthan desert under the guise of a, quote, peaceful nuclear explosion. They called it Project Smiling Buddha. This absolutely enraged the US and Canada because their civilian reactors were the ones used as a cover for the project. India outright refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and spent the next 20 years weaponizing that technology, which, as you can imagine, triggered immediate panic right across their border.
Section 4. Honey traps and covert tests.
Now this takes us to the Middle East and Africa, where extreme global isolation bred some really unlikely alliances. Israel's highly secretive path actually faced fierce opposition from US President John F. Kennedy. But after his assassination, the path sort of cleared, and they quietly completed their program by 1967. Meanwhile, down south, South Africa was totally isolated by global apartheid boycotts and was fearing growing Soviet influence in the region. So they formed a covert survival alliance. Israel shared its weapons and nuclear research, and in exchange, South Africa provided raw uranium, a literal trade in the shadows.
And this alliance culminated in a mystery that still fascinates historians to this day. In 1979, American satellites recorded a massive double flash in the ocean near South Africa, an event that became known as the Vela Incident. To this day, it is widely believed by experts to have been a highly classified, joint covert nuclear test between Israel and South Africa.
But, the South African story has a twist unlike any other in our dossier today. In the year 1990, which coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the impending end of apartheid, South Africa made a historic choice. They became the first and literally, to this day, the only nation to voluntarily and completely dismantle their entire nuclear arsenal.
Section 5. The Ultimate Nuclear Smuggling Ring.
So, how did the final players get their hands on this tech in the modern era? Seriously, ask yourself, how do you build a nuclear bomb when modern satellites, international watchdogs, and global intelligence agencies are watching your every single move? The answer? You have to turn to the black market.
The illicit supply chain here was just staggering. Step 1. A Pakistani scientist named Dr. A.Q. Khan secretly steals uranium enrichment centrifuge blueprints while working in Holland, and he brings them straight back to Pakistan. This allowed Pakistan to successfully test their own weapons in 1998, right on the heels of India's tests. But step 2 is where it gets absolutely crazy. Pakistan then starts trading this nuclear tech globally. In step 3, they trade it to North Korea in exchange for North Korea's advanced Nodong missile designs. This global smuggling ring was a massive, unprecedented scandal. In fact, Dr. Khan shockingly confessed to the whole thing on national television in 2004.
Following this, North Korea's path became an absolute masterclass in deception. In 1990, they actually signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the international agreement specifically meant to stop the spread of these exact weapons. But behind closed doors, using that centrifuge tech they got from Pakistan, they completely cheated the system. They officially broke out of the treaty and conducted a test in 2006. And by 2009, they unleashed a blast so powerful it triggered a magnitude 5 earthquake, officially cementing them as the 10th nation to acquire the bomb.
Section 6. Who enters the shadows next? So with a 10-nation history built entirely on espionage, where are we heading today? The current global tension is palpable. Israel, currently the sole existing nuclear power in the Middle East, is heavily pressuring Iran's advancing nuclear program. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's crown prince has publicly and neutrally stated a very strict condition. If Iran successfully builds a bomb, Saudi Arabia will immediately follow suit to match them. The dominoes are perfectly set up, just waiting for a single push.
So what's the ultimate takeaway from this dossier? It's that the nuclear club wasn't built on trust, not at all. It was built on survival, broken promises, and relentless espionage. As the geopolitical shadows deepen today, which nation will be the 11th to rewrite the rules of global survival? Keep that provocative thought in mind. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we uncover more of how our world truly works.